Next, let's clear up social justice. 60 Minutes destroys Moms for Liberty over grooming, asking, what do they really want? The conservative parents' rights education movement, led by Moms for Liberty, faced scrutiny on 60 Minutes. The segment shed light on their stance against LGBTQ+ educational materials. Co-founders Tiffany Justice and Juno Dawson were interviewed against a backdrop of electoral defeats for endorsed candidates in school board elections across the United States. During the 60 Minutes interview, Scott Pelley noted that Justice and Descovich avoided addressing her questions directly. Instead, they resorted to using written talking points. When pressed further about the alleged indoctrination of children, commonly called by the radical right as grooming, they deflected, focusing instead on educational performance rather than the content of the books. Author Chasten Buttigieg, the spouse of Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, commented in the response to the interview, saying, quote, "They literally have to look at printed talking points," end quote. In response to 60 Minutes, Moms for Liberty criticized CBS for purportedly censoring the content of books discussed during the filming. Specific books, including This Book is Gay by Juno Dawson and Genderqueer by Maia Kobabe, were listed, with Moms for Liberty arguing that exposing children to such content without parental consent could be viewed as grooming. The electoral defeats of Moms for Liberty endorsed candidates in states like Pennsylvania and Iowa underscored a broader public sentiment against their approach to education and LGBTQ+ issues.
We wanted to know about the messages on Mom's X account, which adopts the extremist smear with, if they don't like being called groomers, they should stop trying to groom our kids.
What are you trying to say?
Well, I'm going to say that if we'd have to see the exact tweet. Tiffany manages our Twitter account.
So we read more exact tweets from their account. This targets a librarian. You want to groom our children and we're supposed to give you love? Again, Justice and Descovich went to their talking points.
I'm just asking, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by grooming?
Parents want to partner with their children's schools, but we do not co-parent with the government.
Grooming does not seem like a word that you want to take on.
You know, we did some polling and we really wanted to know, where are the American people on this issue of parental rights and what's happening in our schools?
Dodging questions like those was not an option back in Beaufort, South Carolina. Critics of the book ban said they knew what groomer meant, and they saw it as a threat to people of color and the LGBTQ community.
Wow.
Girl, don't get me started.
Well, now I have to. So, I think this is just what we're seeing, a part of a broader context of an attack on intellectualism in our country. Banning books, I feel like we hear about that from authoritarian regimes. That's the exact kind of thing we are expected to reject as a democracy. And so I guess, I want to know, how do you think we've reached this point? Because I feel that we had, at least when I was in school, I remember we used to do a banned book assignment. And so shout out to the East Brunswick public school system, but we would actually be expected to pick a book that is banned in another school district in America and then read it and write about whether or not we believe the book should be banned. And typically everyone would write the same essay being like, no, this book shouldn't be banned because it talks about history or real life experiences or whatever it might be. And so I think for me, being a transplant to Florida, this is something that's so shocking to me. Yeah. And to see that this is happening in other states and states like our own, how do you think we reached this point?
There's so much to kind of unpack here for me, because this is hard to watch. I have to admit, it's almost like difficult to even watch that. And as a historian, I just kind of go, this looks like the 70s and Anita Bryant's campaign. Like, it's really hard to, when they talk about parental rights, it's so clearly a kind of dog whistle, and the grooming especially is such a dog whistle to people who exactly know what they're talking about. That is, like, it's meant to kind of connote this idea of pedophilia, of intergenerational
tone of that.
Oh, for sure. There's no question about it. So when they're suddenly confronted with like, what do you mean here? They're like, oh no, we're not going to touch this. But it's very much a kind of play of the new right to reframe this to be about parents' rights. Like that is, as opposed to thinking about this, like to understand this as civil liberties so that people have access to education, access to knowledge, and be like, no, I have a right as a parent for conversion therapy, for conversion, like, or to have my student. I mean, that's it. That was actually part of the platform, to imagine parental rights as having the right to put your child in conversion therapy. Like that was the origins of that. Parental rights is a reframing of what is really just an infringement on basic human rights.
And to that point, too, I think it shows an overextension also, the audacity of you to say, well, I don't want my kid to learn this, so no kid should be allowed to learn this. And I'm glad that we're seeing the public rejecting that.
Yes.
We are seeing, as the headline talked about, people are rejecting these candidates and saying, no, like my kids should be able to engage with this. And then when they come home, I can have whatever conversation I want to have at home about our views as a family on this topic. And I think that's where parental rights come in.
Yeah, that's what's so crazy about even using the phrase parental rights to describe it. Because what they've done is they've stripped the rights of parents who do want their kids to have this information addressed in school in a constructive way with knowledge behind it. So they've taken away those parents' rights altogether to have any choice. And you're absolutely right. Our biggest weapon is our vote. And right now there are too many people in office who have got too much power who are making these decisions.
Yeah.
And what was it, 40% of registered Democrats voted in the governor election last time?
Yeah.
The question really becomes for me is this an underscoring of a subliminal message that tells the world the more that you support the LGBTQ community and the more of our community that gets engaged in the school systems, to politics, to government, to city commissioners, to playing very significant and consequential roles in our communities. It wasn't that long ago Harvey Milk was the only person ever that held office. Now we hold office all over the country. Is this a subliminal message saying when you support this group and you support these types of people that enter into our ecosystem, is this what you're going to get? I think it's so much deeper than grooming. I think it's so much different and more relevant and consequential to a storytelling that should be told to our children, that may be offensive. It's so deep, and I think it's a subliminal message saying, this is what you're going to continue to get if you keep letting those people in our ecosystem of our community called the United States of America. That's the problem I have.
And it's the same thing you're seeing. They do it with LGBTQ issues, people of color, immigrants. They have there's this term stealth authoritarianism, and they are quite literally weaponizing words as these trigger words for their in-group. And so we know what you mean, but they're like, oh no, I'm just talking about those people who are doing this obscure thing, but they won't actually
and always remember what they're saying is not what they're really wanting to say. It's not what they really mean.
That's not what they really mean. And that's really what pisses me off the most, because we're in an age and time right now where as a human you can live your truth, right? Like you should be able to live however you would like to identify as, however you would like to live your life as. I've been following Moms for Liberty now for a while. It's wild and hysterical for me.
In Florida.
They're nuts. But they targeted, so there's a group of I would say a queer group of people called furries. And those are people who experiment with cosplay and, for lack of a better term, like a mascot is kind of how I would, the tennis, no mascot, look at me, sports, hello. And so not to say that the furries and the gay community are separate, because we're all under the same umbrella of queer, obviously, but we're all sort of getting tied together, and they're picking the worst articles of anything they could find anywhere on the internet, spinning it, then going to The Onion, which is a made-up website, just so everyone knows, pulling in some words from there, and just kind of making it look as if we're all a freak show, which is kind of crazy. Nothing bothers me. It doesn't bother my life if someone wants to dress up and make love as a mascot. How is that bothering me? Why is it bothering Moms from Liberty? Go cook a casserole. Like what? I don't understand it really,
Eric, this conversation is the 2024 conversation. It started in 2023.
Yeah.
And, it started in Tallahassee. A lot of it started in Tallahassee. And, there'll be a different story in 2025. But I go back to the underlying point that this is their way of saying, see, I told you so. See, I told you so. Yeah. See, I told you so. To the haters who don't want to see you as a young, brilliant African-American man in political office one day. They don't want you running for a government office. They don't want you as a city commissioner, because these are the initiatives that we want to bring up because we want to serve all of our community. As Billie Jean King says it best, I didn't fight for women to be better. We just wanted to be equal.
Right.
It's to me, and that's 100% right. Like, that is, if we think about the origins of even this kind of concept of parental rights, we could see it go back for like whether it was like teaching students like evolution, like the theory of evolution, like there were massive protests, but it was most prominent, without a doubt, the kind of concept of parental rights with racial segregation in schools. That is, there was this idea of white parental rights. Like, there was no clear that it is like to remove your children from a space where black children were going to be allowed. Suddenly, like, no, this concept of parental rights was most prominent after Brown versus Board of Education.
And we're still seeing that. I mean, this is all ties to, even just in Florida, we're seeing the, diversity and inclusion and CRT, even in our colleges. Right. And so, again, that goes back to, like you said, this essentially white comfort at the expense of everyone else.
That's right.
This conversation makes white people uncomfortable, so we shouldn't be talking about it, is essentially the hill the Republican Party is dying on right now.
And they sit behind closed doors and come up with the story of the day. They go to their media friends. They populate this idea that this can be a hot story. They promise all kinds of salaciousness. And then you end up on 60 Minutes with that filth.
Oh, yeah. Everyone's a bigger beast behind a computer screen than they are in person.
It's pretty awful.
Yeah. Sure is.
God forbid you're trying to adopt kids today.
Well,
oh God, don't even say I am.
But it's getting tougher.
It's a scary world. I'll talk to you about that off camera, but it's scary.